This episode of Local Film Talk was recorded in the Green Room at Natty Green's in downtown Raleigh. Perfect for business meetings or just joining friends to watch the big game, the Green Room is the ideal place to host your next event. To learn more, contact David Crack at 919-232-2477 or email david at nattygreens.com. All right, so we're here with Evan Kidd in the Green Room at Natty Greens in downtown Raleigh, and we're trying our new segment. It's some film recommendations from our local filmmakers. Obviously, someone who makes movies has to have seen a lot of movies. So give the audience a couple recommendations. Whether it's good movies, bad movies, old ones, new ones. Just 3 movies that you think they are worth checking out.
Okay. I think all of these, except maybe one, maybe on Netflix. So if you've got Netflix, no excuse not to watch all these things.
All right, even easier.
Yeah, even easier.
Shame me. I'm sure
okay.
I haven't seen them.
Number one recommendation, and it's probably, I go back and forth, but it's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. A very recently made movie called Short Term 12. It's a feature-length film. That guy was really excited about it. It's a feature-length film about a girl who takes care of a whole bunch of people in a foster home, and it's about all the children that she manages. And she has like a really complex relationship with one of her coworkers who's also like her boyfriend. And it's really interesting because, like I said, there's not a lot of films that, have women main characters that aren't, trying to get married or do something. So I think it's really cool to see a strong, independent female character that has a lot to say. And also is...
After watching Displacement Welcome, I can see why this is up your alley.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It very much fits up my alley. And Destin Cretton, the guy who made it, he made really cool films like I Am Not a Hipster. And he has a really interesting style because he comes from documentary.
Okay.
So everything is very handheld. His cinematography is really interesting. It's all handheld. So it feels very raw and real. Like you watch the film and you feel like you're watching a doc sometimes.
Okay.
And you forget, and that's how good the acting is. It's spot on. So it's really cool to see. That's definitely one I'd recommend.
So does it feel like scripted, or does it feel more improvisational?
I think they stuck to the script. I've actually read the script because I'm a really big fan of his writing. He's another writer-director.
Okay.
And I've read his script, and it seems like there wasn't really improv. I think he just wrote such a good script that it just came across like that, coupled with great acting. So that's definitely one I'd recommend, Short Term 12, and actually started out as a short film that he made in film school.
Really?
And he transitioned and got funding for it and made into a feature like 3 or 4 years later. So I think that's another cool, indie filmmaker who came up recently. So I'd definitely check out his work too.
Right, he has similar sensibilities to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. Hopefully we can meet him someday. That would be cool.
That would be cool.
He's a cool dude. And let's see, another film I'd recommend would probably have to be, 12 Angry Men. Let's go back. That's an old-timey film made in the 50s, I believe. And that was one I watched really early on. And it's basically about 12 jurors that are in a really small confined room, and the whole entire film takes place in that room.
Right.
And they basically have to come to a consensus of if this kid is guilty or not. And it's a little bit old and antiquated in certain elements, but I think more or less it's a great example of filmmaking and strong acting and how you can do a lot with a little. Like I said, the whole feature film takes place in one room, and it's all compelling dialogue and conversation. And I think that's what's so interesting. And it's really funny because it takes place during the summer and everything's hot and sweaty and they're opening windows and it's like they can't escape this room and, the jury can't come to a consensus. So it's really interesting, a lot of dialogue. And like I said, the film still holds up today. It was made in the 50s, so I think it's a good
Sidney
example.
Lumet, I think, directed that one.
Yeah.
The guy who did Dog Day Afternoon.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the earlier films I watched. I watched it like for some high school project, and I was like, that was back when I was like younger in like 9th grade or something. I was like, I don't want to watch a black and white film, blah, blah, blah. And I watched it and I was like, wow, this is good. And so, it kind of sparked my interest, And I think that's definitely a really good recommendation.
What's interesting about that one is that it is kind of a gimmick in that it stays in that one room the whole time, which, like you said, is a great example of making the most out of very little.
Yeah.
But what's cool about that is that you don't really think about the gimmick that much.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, Alfred Hitchcock gets a lot of credit for interesting stuff he did along those lines where he had weird limitations like Rope, which was all supposed to look like it was one continuous shot, Lifeboat, which all takes place in a lifeboat out in the middle of the ocean, and a couple other ones he did that are centered around some kind of gimmick, but in a lot of cases, the gimmick is very obvious and
Right.
it kind of draws attention to itself. I always thought Real Window is,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's
a
a
great
great
example,
movie and I
great
really
movie.
like it, but you can tell that the whole gimmick is a movie, like, from this guy's perspective
Right.
looking out a window in a very small claustrophobic area. But
Yeah.
with 12 Angry Men, while it does have that small one location gimmick, it never really feels like it doesn't feel like it's making any sacrifices
Right.
in order to stay within those parameters.
Right.
It just feels very natural,
It just
and you don't
rolls
think
with
about it.
everything, and it just flows, and
So-
that's important.
Yeah, I really like that one. That's a good pick.
Yeah. And then I guess for my last one, I would have to say, and these are the films that got me into filmmaking. They're very dramatic, very cinematic, but I love them. The Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah.
Just great films in my opinion. I love Peter Jackson's work. When I watched those films, I was very younger than obviously what I am now. So, I go back and watch them and I find some flaws and find some this and that. But they're
Right.
still like films that stick with me just because they have that nostalgic connection to them. And really for me, what got me into them at that young age was like I was talking about at the beginning of the show. I really was into storytelling when I was younger, into character building, into world building and all that stuff. And that film series really, I almost call it a series. I never really pick one single film just because it's the trilogy.
Right.
So I almost really just consider it one big thing.
And we're just talking Lord of the Rings. We're not including The Hobbit.
Yeah, I like the Hobbit movies. They're really good, but they're kind of a different classification.
Right.
They're not as cinematic. I mean, they are, but it's just a different classification. In my
Right.
mind.
It's a different trilogy.
Yeah. Well, I like the Lord of the Rings just because the effects are more practical and everything looks
He
a little more
came
gritty.
from Peter Jackson came from like schlocky
Yeah,
horror
he
stuff.
did,
He
like
was
the
doing
B-movie,
like his early stuff
Yeah.
is the same as like early Sam Raimi stuff,
Right,
and there
yeah.
was a lot of props that while cool and gory were also kind of corny in
Right.
some ways, but in
Right.
a fun kind of way, and campy. Campy is the word I'm looking
Campy.
for. They're kind of campy, and I remember some of the battle scenes, particularly the last one in the first one, Fellowship of the Ring. The last battle scene where they're fighting the orcs in the woods,
Yeah.
the one where Sean Bean, what's his name, Boromir dies.
Yeah.
For some reason, that fight scene reminds me of like Xena and
Oh,
Hercules and all those like weekend fantasy drama ones
right.
where it's just people in costumes running
Right.
around the woods, and it feels very. As opposed to the later Lord of the Rings and now the Hobbit stuff, it feels more real,
Right.
because it was all practical.
Well, see, and that's
Nowadays
the
it's all
thing.
just a bunch of computers and everything,
Right.
and you're like, that's kind of cool, but you really like it. It was a big movie at the time.
Yeah.
Fellowship of the Rings in particular. It was a big movie at the time, but at the same time, there's a lot of smaller practical stuff that
Right.
makes it feel
and
real.
it lends itself so well because while they're getting chased in the woods, I mean they're all actors in costume that are the orcs. They're not
Right.
CGI. Replicating an army of 5,000 running down a hill.
Right.
It's very small pockets of 20 orcs chasing them around the woods.
And 10
that's
years
what's
later, you
interesting.
look at the CGI
Yeah.
in Return of the King,
Right.
and you can see it starting to wear.
Right.
But you go back and you look at guys in orc
holds
costumes
up.
in the first one, and it looks real because it is real.
Exactly, and that's the thing. I love practical effects. I'm not really doing that in my own films now. I'd like to. I've got some ideas, but I think when you can get practical effects and get them done right, perfect. I just love it every time.
It's really interesting to think, we forget nowadays that the size and the scale of those movies, the amount of effects, the idea of filming a whole bunch of them at the same time, of giving, Peter Jackson was nobody at the time, of giving him
Just
the
such a big
reins on
license,
something
yeah.
like this. I mean, that kind of thing happens all the time now.
Right.
When Marvel announces who's going to be directing their movies, you're like, who the hell is that guy?
And the new Star Wars movies, even.
Right.
Like, Rian
I mean,
Johnson-
J.J. Abrams was a
Yeah.
pretty big name, but
Like Rian Johnson came from TV.
Right.
And he did Looper, and that really helped. But
Looper's the biggest thing he did.
Yeah.
Before that, it was Brick,
Yeah.
and now they give him a Star Wars movie. So, it's commonplace for that kind of
Right.
stuff to happen now, for somebody to shoot 2 or 3 movies at once or spend $150 million. But at the time that they announced that Peter Jackson was going to be doing this and what he was going to be doing,
that was unheard of.
Right,
You know,
absolutely.
nobody had ever given somebody who wasn't proven on a big special effects movie $300 million to
Right.
shoot 3 movies at once.
And he
So.
did them all back to back within 3
And he
years.
knocked it out of the park.
He did
I gotta
great.
say, I
Love
love
him.
those. That's my wife's favorite
Yeah?
movie series.
Oh, great, yeah.
So-
That's probably my favorite series as well. Like, it's just so spot on in my opinion. There's flaws, but overall it's spot on.
Right. No, that's a good pick. That's a cheat. 3
Yeah.
movies at once, but
Yeah,
it's,
but
it's
I
a
could
good
say
one.
I cheated, so I guess that's really...
We'll allow it. Judges?
Yeah.
Judges? It's
Okay.
good. We're good.
2 thumbs up. Well,
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. I dig it.
All right. Awesome. Well, I like those picks. If
Yeah.
if there are any of those that you haven't seen, definitely go check them out. Evan, it's a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time.
Thanks for coming out, and keep us informed
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
to anything else you're working on.